Yeah, do it.
Okay. So this is called Surviving Chemo, and the subtitle is something like, I haven't got the subtitle yet, but it's using natural therapies to address conventional cancer treatment. Again, the book is being written for people who choose conventional cancer treatment, not for people who can afford to go off to the Hippocrates Institute or to these various places. You know, they don't take Medicare, those places. And so this is written for people who are most people and who are suddenly, they find out suddenly that they have cancer and they don't know what to do. They opt to get into the system. Once they're in the system, they feel trapped in the system. They feel that the toxic chemicals that are coming into their body, there's nothing they can do about them. And so that's what we're doing. I'm going to run down this, and then Mike is going to talk about the program. Chemotherapy for cancer is only part of the healing process. And this is the point that we're making. We can't rely on chemo alone to do the job of healing. What chemo is designed to do is to kill cells. It, of course, kills cancer cells, but it also kills good cells, as we know. And they never tell you in the oncologist's office what's likely to happen. They'll tell you some of the side effects that you can expect, and I wasn't even told some of the side effects. I had to read about them. But they certainly won't tell you things about, how your body will be terribly compromised by, your health will be terribly compromised by this particular process of healing. So the book tells you what chemo will not do and what it will do. It's very interesting thing about chemotherapy. Has anyone has had a friend who has had cancer? It's 1 in 4 of us now, maybe 1 in 3. It's an absolute epidemic. The interesting thing that we found out about chemotherapy is this. The chemochemicals that are used, chemotherapy, were developed in World War I at the time when they were doing chemical warfare with mustard gas. Now, all of this stuff has been outlawed because it was so lethal that what was happening was that they were killing their own armies. They were spreading this horrible gas everywhere, but they couldn't contain it. And so the minute these soldiers began to take off their gas masks, they were dead. And they were the people who were actually spreading the stuff. So it was outlawed by the Geneva Conventions. But what happened was after World War I, doctors and scientists started figuring out that certain of these chemicals would actually destroy cells. And they figured out that eventually, over a period of 20 or 30 years, you can read about this. It's a wonderful new book called The Emperor of All Diseases. It's a huge book. It's like a dictionary. It's about cancer. And they go into the origins. It's the history of cancer, going back to the time of the Egyptians. And he talks a lot in there about the origins of chemotherapy in warfare, and how these chemicals were developed out of weaponry, and that chemo still carries the words. We still say that in an obituary, we'll say that he died battling cancer, or he finally succumbed to his battle against and we call it the war on cancer. And that's the thing, the national mantra is the war on cancer. And we have a lot of, even an oncologist will say, your cancer is very aggressive, or your cancer, this will destroy you, this will kill you. You have to think of cancer as the enemy. And so when I had my cancer, I decided not to go there, not to go into those warlike words, and thought of it in terms. Mike and I decided very early on that we were going to hold the idea of just toxins flushing through my body. That's all. I was just getting clean all the time. I was cleaning myself up. It was not about, you've got to go to battle with this thing. You can't win the battle against cancer. You just can't. Not on that level. You have to, do it in other ways. You have to replace the bad stuff that's going on with good stuff. So Mike is going to talk about a little bit about the program. And this is based mainly on, well, most immediately it's based on my healing, because he was my caretaker during this whole time, my caregiver. And he had to, as a naturopathic doctor, he had to develop this on his own. There's precious little stuff out there on surviving chemo. There's a lot on surviving cancer or preventing cancer with natural means. But there's practically nothing on how to use natural means to get over chemo or to work with chemo to get over cancer.
Yeah, when kind of developing this for Joseph, I was really motivated. I decided that my biggest fear is to watch him suffer. So I really came up with a whole program. And one of the things that I started looking at is, and our first thing was, we started looking at our diet. Even though our diet was pretty good, it was mainly meat and vegetable-based diet. And so from there, we really looked at this and said, okay, we have created an environment, an internal environment, in order for this to come about. Looking back in history, it's like when humans were hunters and gatherers, our diet changed all the time. It had to. We were basically really living off the earth and what we could find versus out of the grocery store. So I was looking at that part of it and decided, what a dietary change had to happen. We needed to change chemistry internally. So what we opted to do is more of a vegan diet. That means we removed all meat, almost all proteins with the exception of your tissue-based protein, and removed all sugar. By the way, the reason why the immune system does not find cancer is because it's sugar-coated. It's a sugar-protein combination that goes over a cell. And the immune system looks at it and says, oh, well, that's just food. That's how they identify it as harmless. Well, it creates this perfect environment for reproduction to happen. Because everything, it's kind of like, for somebody who is a junk food junkie, it's like living at a 7-Eleven. It's like everything is right there to create happen. So, doing this, we really decided that, okay, changing the chemistry internally was going to be a huge benefit. Oncologists, by the way, will often say that there is no dietary restrictions. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, they should be shot for saying this. Okay? They have candy bars, okay, vending machines, Diet Coke, Coca-Colas, and everything else that you can possibly imagine that contains sugar right there in the chemo place. They say they do this because people complain of having a foul taste when being injected with the chemotherapy solutions. So, what happens is that sits there and feeds cancer. Sugar is the basically most useful energy source for the human body. So if you want to, reproduce really fast, just have a whole bunch of sugar. If you want to see kids go absolutely crazy, same thing. So that was the one thing that we decided to do right away. It's like, okay, let's change diet. So we did that, and then it was all about supplementing. Figuring out, what I started doing was really looking at what are the common side effects of chemotherapy. Number one is nausea. Do you ever feel nausea?
Not once.
Well, doesn't that depend on the type of chemo you get?
No, I didn't feel nausea because of what he was giving me. Everybody else
No.
around me had terrible nausea, and they would leave to, I mean, they would go to the doctor all the time. Yeah.
Does it depend on what type of chemo you get to some degree? But overall, this is what every oncologist will say, is nausea is a fact of life. Anybody who is going through chemo, they will feel nauseated to some degree. And here's a really great thing. Ginger root eliminates nausea. It's that simple. Ginger root. You know, it comes in lots of convenient forms nowadays. The root itself, making it into tea, juicing it, or, even easier, powder form. There was a great thing when I was going through school, and that was how to be an effective naturopath within the conventional hospitals. In other words, when I got a client that was in a hospital, how can I go ahead and administer things without it looking like medicine? Because that becomes an immediate threat. And the greatest thing is make sure that people do not have any sort of dietary restrictions. I've really hammered Joseph's oncologist to make sure that there are no dietary restrictions. And he thinks dietary has no influence, so that was great. That means I could basically bring anything I wanted to into the hospital as long as it was not in a capsule. So Joseph had Echinacea tea with ginger. He had lots of green tea. And teas they look as useless, which is beautiful, because it's very easy to make sure that I can administer things like magnesium in powder form. And there's a huge, just gigantic benefit in order to keep everything going. So we did a lot of different dietary supplements. One of the things is asparagus powder. I'll kind of give you a little list of what we ended up doing. This was asparagus powder, reishi mushroom, bioflavonoids, spinach, astragalus, magnesium, golden seal, and of course my ultimate favorite is cayenne pepper.
So let me just interject. He's talking about powdered spinach, powdered asparagus, just so you know.
This is all in powder form. The great thing about powders is you can take a lot of them without filling up. Very easy on the digestive system, nothing has to be broken down. They're convenient.
Are they processed with heat to make them powdered?
Oftentimes not. Usually they're dry. And most of the time it's done in dry climates, so that they don't have moisture and mold problems.
What about the loss of enzymes? Because it's no longer has any enzymes.
That's correct. It doesn't have any enzymes, and that part of it is basically the downfall of powders. Okay? The thing is, they're still absorbable because they're broken down so much that the body doesn't have to sit there and break it down, eat it further. So that's where you can, in a way, kind of bypass that aspect of enzymes, even though it will metabolize and go into the body. So the other thing that we took was, and this goes into the supplement side of things, was pancreatic enzyme. Pancreatic enzyme is really about breaking down the sugar protein kind of candy coating that goes around cancer cells. So that's where we end up playing with enzymes. The other thing is, we did lots of things with vitamin C. I did ask the oncologist to give Joseph a vitamin C drip, and he refused. He said that was against protocol. Oncologists are kind of smushed between two really difficult positions. And that is, if they go away from anything that they're told, they can lose their license really quick. Okay, and they're not going to risk that, especially because in order to become an oncologist, it costs about $500,000 just to go through school. So financially, they're pressured. They're in an awful position. And on top of that, they're supposed to be playing God. They're supposed to be curing people from absolutely everything. So they're torn. And I feel really bad for them because they're in this nasty position. So he told us that no, he would not do a vitamin C drug. So basically, I just started getting very creative how much vitamin C I could get into Joseph's body without creating any sort of side effects of those. The other thing is, usually with chemotherapy, people have the tendency to lose vitality. Their bodies are going through such a difficult time to try to survive. They stay in kind of a survival mode. So one of the things that we're giving Joseph, and what Joseph got to have, is ginseng. What?
Ginseng?
Ginseng.
Ginseng.
Yeah, lots of ginseng and niacin. If you're
What kind of ginseng? Korean kind or this depressant?
let me think of it for a second. It's
The Wisconsin.
no, it's not the Wisconsin.
Korean.
Yes. Let me think of the actual name of it.
It's the Korean.
Patcells? That'll come to me in a second.
Right.
So, the other thing is we wanted Justin's hair to grow back. So,
I wanted my hair to grow back. The first thing that happens, of course, is that your hair disappears.
basically, the structure of hair is so fragile, and it's made to sit and reproduce, and this is the great thing why it grows. The downfall is with chemotherapy, anything that's fragile starts destroying quickly. So basically, all areas that contain hair start falling out. Biotin was definitely that helped reproducing, hair follicles. Skin is the other thing that it kind of sort of, destroyed also. Then we started doing spirulina. Spirulina is one of these amazing foods. There's a great book out there. It's called the 10 Superfoods. Spirulina is number 1. It's blue-green algae, and it doesn't really taste like much. If you can think of what pond scum would taste like, that's basically the genre of flavor. So it's nothing wonderful. There's a great, easy way of changing the flavor, and that's putting a half of Granny Smith apple in with it, just blending it up. Vitamin E, CoQ enzyme. Then the other thing that I started researching is how to break down cells. Ones that are basically not healthy to begin with, how do you break them down quickly? This came into the whole herbology side. I started using a group of herbs called adaptogens. Adaptogens will strengthen cell walls, or it'll destroy the cell wall. Depending on if it's a strong cell wall to begin with, it'll start destroying it. If it's a strong cell wall to begin with, it'll start building it to make it even stronger. This will protect healthy cells from chemotherapy. The other thing is I do not want to stop chemotherapy from doing its job, and that is to help destroy cancer cells. And adaptogens also work in the same way, and that is they break down the cell wall in order for it to start dissolving. And you had so much green tea.
I probably drank more than a gallon of green tea a day. And the reason that he wanted me to do that was to flush out. You see, I wasn't just flushing out the chemo, I was also flushing out the cancer. Because the chemo, once it killed the cancer cells, left that stuff was still there waiting to be eliminated. So the faster you could get it, I could get it out of my body, the better. And green tea was the supreme. That was my friend, let me tell you. And I would have it because I like to have it with a little bit of almond milk, just to have a little bit of sweetener. It's kind of bitter tasting, as you know. But Mike was getting this industrial strength green tea from some supplier in China or someplace, and it was really doing the trick. I mean, if you were on a desert island and had to have one thing to get over people, it would probably be green tea.
Kind of Japanese or Chinese.
Did I see Japanese green tea?
Yeah, it's strong.
What's that?
does that kind of under the adaptogens. Kind of explain adaptogen to us.
Okay. Basically, the definition of an adaptogen is to balance out the difference between healthy cells and mutated cells. So it allows the mutated ones to disintegrate, start breaking them down, and the healthy cells, it allows them to thrive.